the 11-year-old girl the world has come to know as the Sea Orphan.
Has she been conscious at all since they picked her up?
That I don't know. I couldn't say, sir.
Was she unconscious when she was brought in?
Yes, sir. She's out now, I believe.
She was in full shock when she got here.
What's her condition?
Serious, but I think she'll be all right. I think she'll live.
Behind these windows of Mercy Hospital overlooking Biscayne Bay lies little Terry Jo Duperrault, still recovering from her ordeal aboard the ketch Bluebelle.
What were her first words?
Her name?
She said anything else?
No word.
Is there any indication that there might be somebody else out there?
Well, there's always possibility wherever there's hope, and we certainly have hope the search is going to continue.
The year is 1961. 11-year-old Terry Jo lives a happy life with her loving family, her father Arthur, her mother Jean, her brother Brian, and her baby sister Renee. Arthur, a successful optometrist, always dreamed of taking his entire family for a cruise across the world. He charters a 60-foot-long twin-masted sailing ketch to make the trip from Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas. While unable to navigate it himself, he hires a captain, a former World War II fighter pilot named Julian Harvey, who agrees to the trip as he can take his wife Mary Dean along with him. It's November 8th, 1961. In the port of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, the Duperrault family sails out with Captain Harvey at the helm of the ship called the Bluebelle. They spend several days exploring Caribbean islands, the children enjoying their share of snorkeling in the neighboring waters. November 12th, the family decides to make the trip back to Florida at night, excited about this new experience. In the early hours of the evening, Terry Jo makes her way down to the cabin she shares with her sister. The rest of the family stays upstairs, the children napping, the adults enjoying the last moments of their vacation. It's November 13th, the following day. At approximately 12:35 p.m., a crew member aboard the oil tanker called the Gulf Lion sees a man waving frantically from a dinghy. The man yells the words, "Help, I have a dead baby on board." As the ship crew pulls the man aboard, they notice the deceased body of a red-haired young girl wearing a life jacket, laying on the floor of the dinghy. The man identifies himself as Julian Harvey. He explains that at approximately 8:30 p.m. the previous evening, the Bluebelle ship was hit by a strong squall, causing the ship to keel over and the main mast to snap. He was then separated from all other members on board and was forced to abandon the sinking ship. He was unable to save any of the members, including his wife, Mary Dean. His depiction of the events are thorough and leaves little room for doubt that this is what really happened. The problem is, Julian Harvey is lying. For the next 3 days, rescue missions are sent across the sea to the area Harvey claims the ship has sunk, hoping to find other survivors, to no avail. On November 15th, Harvey is allowed to return to Miami for further questioning by the U.S. Coast Guard. It's November 17th, 5 days after the Bluebelle sank. Midway through Julian Harvey's interrogation, a captain runs into the room and says, "There's a survivor." When hearing the words, Captain Harvey yells out, "Oh my God," before quickly calming himself to say, "Isn't that wonderful?" His behavior then changes drastically, as he asks to be excused from the interrogation, under the pretext of being tired and wishing to speak with his deceased wife's family. After leaving the interrogation office, Harvey drives a short distance on Biscayne Boulevard before checking in to the Sandman Motel under a fake name. The next morning, a maid walks in to find him dead in his room.
Can you think of any reason why he would do it, or what he did?
None other than that I have known him for these many years, and I think that he had found the dream girl of his life, and since he's been back, and since I picked him up at the airport, I would say that he has been in a very deep state of shock. And I think that he was still in that condition and possibly had never come out of it until the time of his death.
In a hospital bed only 7 miles away, little Terry Jo Duperrault is in a coma, recovering from her ordeal at sea, while her rescue makes the front page across the country. The sudden death of Julian Harvey raises more questions than answers about what could have happened on the night the Bluebelle sank. Everyone awaits for Terry Jo to wake up and share her side of the story. It's November 20th, when finally the truth unravels. Terry Jo is awake and ready to talk. Her story begins on the night of November 12th.
I was awakened by my brother screaming, and it was the type of a scream that it set me on edge. I knew something terrible had happened.
She hears the words, "Help, Daddy, help." Then, silence. Alone in her room, she finds courage to walk up to the main deck. but nothing can prepare her for what she's about to find.
As I came out here in the kitchen, my mother and brother were lying there, and there was a big pool of blood.
I think I went into shock because I didn't go and touch them, and I think I knew they were dead.
Unable to look at her mother and brother any longer, she continues to walk toward the upper level, hoping to find her father, when she's met by a crazy-eyed Julian Harvey. She asks him what happened, but instead of answering, he shoves her down the ladder, yelling at her to get back down to her room.
I was very trusting, and I thought that something bad had happened, and that he didn't want me to see what had happened.
Terrified of what she just saw, Terry Jo sits on her bed, waiting, when all of a sudden, she notices water coming into her cabin. Fear turns into panic as she becomes aware that the boat is sinking. Before she can have any sort of reaction, Harvey comes into her room, a rifle in his hands. He doesn't say a single word. He just looks at her with madness in his eyes. Then, he walks away.
He didn't kill Terry Jo because he knew the boat was sinking. She was a goner.
Terry Jo continues to wait in her room while it is quickly filling up with water. She's afraid of what she might find if she dares go back up, but she might not have any other choice.
I decided that I couldn't stay there any longer because the water was making my mattress float, so I waded through and I went on top of the deck again.
When she finally reaches the main deck, she sees Captain Harvey setting the dinghy down into the water. She dares to ask him if the boat is sinking. Again, he doesn't answer. Harvey then dives into the pitch-black sea and catches on to the dinghy that's floating away. Terry Jo is now alone, the Bluebelle nearly fully sunk, and the only living soul around has disappeared into the night.
Terry Jo somehow had the presence of mind to remember that there was a life float lashed to the deck.
I knew the boat was going down, and it was do this or die. I scrambled over the sails to the top of the deck where I knew a cork raft was, untied it, threw it over the side, and got in it.
By the time Terry Jo makes it onto the cork raft, the boat is gone, but the rope that tied the raft on board is still attached to the sunken ship, threatening to pull her under unless she can untie it in time. She scrambles in the darkness, unable to see anything. She does her best to find the knots with her fingers and pull at the wet string with her nails. Just as the rope begins to pull her raft underwater, she succeeds, freeing herself from the Bluebelle.
I huddled in this raft, and it was very dark, and I was motionless and silent, and I just stayed that way and stayed that way. It finally dawned on me that there was something evil about Captain Harvey, and I was very fearful that he would find me.
Floating alone into darkness, she refrains from screaming out for help, worried of what Captain Harvey might do if he found her. So she sits and waits, not making a sound, waiting for morning to come. When the sun finally rises, she's relieved to find that she's all alone and Harvey is nowhere in sight, but all she can see is water in every direction. November 13th, Terry Jo Duperrault sits on her life float, her legs dangling in the water.
I was sitting in this cork raft, and the bottom was interlaced rope, and the only position I could be in was sitting. And the parrotfish started picking at me through the rope.
Her feet are bleeding, but there's nothing she can do about it. As the hours pass, the sun quickly becomes a threat as well, burning her skin for hours on end. With no water or food, she starts to think she might not last for very long. She focuses on trying to spot any ship or plane on the horizon. Hopefully someone is aware the ship has gone down, and by some miracle, they'll send help to save her. When the night comes, Terry Jo has to stay sitting. And though she tries to stay awake, she's exhausted, and her mind drifts in and out of consciousness.
I had a dream that I could see the blue lights of an airport, the landing strip, and I could see that my parents were waiting for me at the end of the landing strip. I was going to meet them. I jumped out of the raft, and jumping out of the raft awakened me, and fortunately I hadn't let go, and I scrambled back in.
She realizes that it's dangerous to sleep. If she loses the raft, she's as good as dead. November 14th, as the dawn breaks, she sees a small red plane circling overhead. She starts to get excited, convinced that she'll finally be rescued. But there's just one problem.
The life raft that she was able to get off of the Bluebelle was white. Wave caps are white. And it was just impossible to see this little white oval thing bouncing around on the ocean surrounded by these white waves.
There was a red search plane that came so close to me I could almost reach up and grab it. I took my blouse off and I waved it thinking, and I was screaming and thinking that, I'm here. Don't you see me?
The plane comes around and dives just above her head, close enough that she can see the details on the underside. She's convinced that the plane will come to her rescue.
They flew off and it was very disheartening.
When she spots a ship on the horizon, she starts to paddle with her hands and feet, but it becomes clear to her that she could never reach it in time. Her hope fades with every ship she sees. November 16th, Terry Jo has been holding on to life in her cork raft for 4 days and nights. She no longer hopes when she sees a boat or plane. She just sits, her mind drifting off. Her lips are swollen and dry, her body aches all over. Her skin feels like it caught fire. She stares ahead, not paying much attention to the ships that, like all the others before, have come and went. The truth is, she's losing consciousness.
A Greek freighter was going through the Providence Channel in the Bahamas, and one of the men on deck, he was looking out across the sea that was covered with whitecaps, but he noticed in the distance one whitecap that didn't seem to disappear.
The man in the lookout spotted me with his binoculars and at first thought that I was a fisherman, and then realized that a fisherman wouldn't be out in such a little boat.
It must have seemed like something completely unreal because she was almost in a coma at that point in time.
I was almost dead from exposure and dehydration. My heart rate was irregular. My kidneys weren't working. So I was near death.
Has she been conscious at all since?
That I don't know. I couldn't say, sir.
Was she unconscious when she was brought in?
Yes, sir. She's out now, I believe.
Behind these windows of Mercy Hospital overlooking Biscayne Bay lies little Terry Jo Duperrault, still recovering from her ordeal aboard the ketch Bluebelle.
She was in full shock when she got here.
What were her first words?
Her name.
Just her name. She said anything else? Say
No,
anything?
no word.
Express any feeling? Any pain?
Vibrating, no words.
What's her condition?
Serious, but I think she'll be all right. I think she'll live.
It's November 20th. Terry Jo Duperrault has just delivered her testimony to the investigators from her hospital bed. She confirmed that everything Captain Harvey said about the events has been a lie.
It is concluded that the ketch Bluebelle was intentionally scuttled. It is further concluded that Arthur Duperrault, Jean Duperrault, Brian Duperrault, and Mary Jordan Harvey lost their lives at the hands of Julian A. Harvey prior to the sinking of the vessel. The exact nature of the circumstances whereby these lives were lost, or the order in which they perished, cannot be ascertained. It is further concluded that the motives for the acts of Julian A. Harvey cannot be ascertained. However, the fact that he was the sole beneficiary of his wife's insurance policy and that he was sorely in need of funds must be considered.
When looking into Julian Harvey's past, it becomes plausible that he had done that before. His record showed a history of insurance fraud, boats sunk or burned, of airplanes crashed, and, worst of all, his ex-wife being killed in an automobile accident. Although the details surrounding the deaths of the Duperrault family remain unknown, the investigation shows that it is likely Julian Harvey was in the process of killing his wife when he was caught by either Arthur or Jean Duperrault. Harvey then decided to kill everyone on board and sink the ship to hide his crime. What he didn't take into account was for little 11-year-old Terry Jo to survive alone at sea and ruin his devious plan.
What was Terry Jo's attitude during the interview?
She was very composed. I was surprised at the amount of fortitude and courage that she has shown throughout. We asked her several times if she was getting tired and wanted to stop, but she said no. She answered all questions in a very frank and forthright and honest manner. She is quite a young lady.
Terry Jo is safe, but the girl whom the world has come to know as the Sea Orphan has lost her entire family. Her aunt and uncle take her in, treating Terry Jo as if she was their own daughter.
I love my aunt and uncle dearly, and to this day, they're my parents. But at that time, I never wanted to let go of my mom and dad, and so growing up, it was very difficult. I didn't believe my father was dead because I had not seen him. I would just pick up and leave on a whim. So I would drive to like North Carolina Beach looking for my dad. I was always searching. I did that for many, many years until I was about 35, then I accepted it finally.
All her adult life, Terry Jo has been attracted by the water, working to help regulation and zoning. Even after all her trauma, she still feels a strong bond between her and the sea. She says she wants to protect the ocean because the ocean saved her as a child. It's also her way of feeling connected with her family.
It's a testimony to the strength of the human will and the human spirit. It's a morality tale. It's a story of more than surviving. It's a story of the power of evil, but the refusal of the human spirit to be dominated by evil.
If you're put in a situation that is challenging, you have to adapt to whatever the circumstances are and go with the flow. And I think that anybody that does this can survive.
I'm so fortunate that I had my family. I hope that I can just continue to be healthy and happy and, have the wonderful love that I share with my family and friends.
It took years for her to recover from her ordeal at sea, but today, Terry Jo has become a beacon of hope for survivors everywhere. She is living proof that even after tragedy, there's a life worth living.